I think Palpatine is plotting to get rid of the clones, at least that's the direction that Season 2 seems to be headed towards. And I think that the way that he's going to remove the clones will be absolutely brutal. Back in Season 1, we were first introduced to this idea of stormtroopers replacing clones through the Project War Mantle. Following discussions between Tarkin, Rampart, and the Kaminoans, serious questions were being raised about the cost of creating more clones and whether or not it was still necessary to have them around. But while Tarkin and Rampart appeared adamant that the clones were no longer of use or worth having around, it seems to be the case that replacing clones with stormtroopers was far from a sure thing, which was why Rampart needed to gain Tarkin's approval of his War Mantle project, a project that ironically had the first generation of stormtroopers being trained by clone commandos. This was also partially the reason why Rampart had Crosshair lead an elite squad of stormtroopers, although that didn't seem to turn out very well. But the point is that during Season 1, whether stormtroopers would officially replace clones was a big question mark until the Season 1 finale, and it seems like this major shift in Imperial military directive is definitely here to stay. At least that seems to be the case in Season 2. In fact, in the few episodes that we've got so far, more and more Phase 1 stormtroopers are making their appearances, and in Episode 3, we got by far the biggest sign that the end is coming for the clones, with something called the Defense Recruitment Bill being voted on the Senate floor. While not much is known about what the Defense Recruitment Bill is really about, we can sort of deduce that Palpatine is trying to push the Senate to support increasing the number of stormtroopers, which certainly comes at the expense of clones as we learn in Episode 3.
I heard the Defense Recruitment Bill is up for a vote again. Let's hope it doesn't pass, for our sake.
But it also becomes clear that getting the bill to pass through the Senate won't be as easy as Palpatine would probably like. In fact, as we learn from the conversation between the two clones in Episode 3, this isn't the first time that the bill has been voted on. Judging by how the two clones were describing the voting situation of the bill, it has been voted on at least once previously. A vote that likely failed due to the lack of support within the Senate for reasons that remain a mystery. And while you might be asking why Palpatine would even need the support of the Senate to do such a thing, it's important to take note that at this point in time, Palpatine's power isn't absolute. Despite naming himself Emperor, he's still at a stage of consolidating his power and still depends on the Senate to approve any major policies, which is why this bill was even voted on in the first place. So that being said, with Palpatine needing to get this bill through a Senate that appears to still oppose the Defense Recruitment Bill, what exactly can Palpatine do about this? Well, I think that the trailer may have given us a clue as to just what exactly Palpatine might be up to and just how he might use this to his advantage to get the bill passed. If you go through the Season 2 trailer, you'll find a scene where Omega somehow stumbles upon Palpatine in the middle of the Senate chamber. But what's more interesting is if you look at the background, and more specifically the screen behind Palpatine, if you slow down the footage, you'll notice that Palpatine is actually showcasing the destruction of Tipoca City, the very same footage we saw play out back in Season 1. But just what exactly is Palpatine trying to prove here? While the few snapshots of Palpatine that we have were brief, we actually got more clues if you take a look at the episode titles of Season 2, specifically Episode 7 titled The Clone Conspiracy. So what I think Palpatine is trying to do here is to somehow use manipulated footage of the destruction of Tipoca City to convince the Senate that the Defense Recruitment Bill is an absolute necessity. More specifically, I think Palpatine is going to paint the clones or Kaminoans as rebels or traitors, providing an explanation as to why the Empire needs to cease its dependence on the clones for its own security. After all, if the Kaminoans couldn't be trusted and tried to seize power for themselves, then by extension, the clones can't be trusted as well, as the clones were made by them in the first place. Palpatine could then use this as an explanation for why Tipoca City was destroyed, needing to act quickly in order to shut down this supposed insurrection. And I really think that if this is indeed Palpatine's plan, it would make a whole lot of sense. By conjuring up this fake rebellion/insurrection and depicting the Kaminoans as separatists and traitors, it would not only validate the need to destroy Tipoca City, but also affirm the need to recruit and train more stormtroopers. By ensuring that the supply of soldiers was not restricted to a single source, it would also ensure that it would be far more difficult for the Empire soldiers to be corrupted by outside influence. And should Palpatine use this as an explanation, the footage and perhaps some other form of evidence supposedly corroborating this claim, it just may be enough to sway more senators to support the defense recruitment bill. Not to mention, given the growing number of clones who had supposedly defected from the Empire, it wouldn't be too far-fetched if we saw Palpatine use these numbers as support for his claim that the Kaminoans, and by extent their clone creations, aren't to be trusted. Hence the need for a new form of soldier. The only part where I am not entirely sure about is if Palpatine is really going to paint every single clone as traitors. Painting every single clone as a traitor may very well amount to military suicide, especially since the clones still do make up the vast majority of the Empire's army. And so, to suddenly label all of them as traitors may very well just undermine Palpatine's rule instead of reinforcing it, especially if a huge chunk of the military would suddenly disappear. But that being said, Palpatine could very well be clever about this, perhaps only suggesting the idea that the loyalty of the clones could not be trusted, but not enough to label them as outright traitors. Using this subtlety, Palpatine could also then use it as an excuse to start centralizing and bringing the clones to one area, perhaps under the guise of a vetting process in order to sort out the traitors from the rest of the good clones. Palpatine could effectively begin the transition process from clones to stormtroopers without having to release every single clone at the same time, ensuring that the Empire would still have a standing army to protect itself while ensuring a smooth transition. Another point to make, and perhaps reason for why Palpatine might also want to get rid of the clones, is that each and every clone is evidence of the Grand Sith conspiracy. Keep in mind that most clones still have an inhibitor chip within their brain, and even though Tipoca City was destroyed, you can be sure that information about the nature of the inhibitor chip is probably locked away in some secret Imperial archive. And so Palpatine has all the incentive in the galaxy to want to make the transition from clones to stormtroopers as quickly as possible, especially for fear that members of the Senate might find out and delegitimize his position of power. It's also important to note that the next episode after the clone conspiracy is actually titled Truth and Consequence. And we also know for a fact that the Bad Batch will at some point in time conduct operations on Coruscant, evidenced by Omega's appearance in the Senate. So perhaps following this false allegation made by Palpatine, one of the opposing senators such as Bail Organa could decide to hire the Bad Batch on a search and recovery mission to retrieve vital information that would disprove Palpatine's claims, giving us a reason for why the Bad Batch would even be on Coruscant in the first place. But regardless as to the specifics of how Palpatine might go about framing the Kaminoans and the clones, or how the Bad Batch might react to this, I think it's pretty clear that Palpatine is very intent on getting rid of the clones. So what do you guys think? How do you think Palpatine is going to get rid of the clones? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I am the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.